I still remember the exact moment the shift began, the moment the air in the room changed, the moment my mom's voice became something sharp instead of soft. I was 32, sitting at the dining table with my elbows propped up, half listening to my mom explain her final wishes while poking at a slice of lemon cake she'd baked for the occasion. A family meeting, she called it. Very serious, very formal, and yet she served cake. I should have known something was off when she asked all of us to sit down after dinner like we were a board of directors instead of a family. My name's Craig, and I'm the youngest son. Still am, I guess. That night just made it obvious that I was also the least favored, even if no one said it out loud. Not until then. My brother, Daniel, is 4 years older than me and has always been the golden child. It wasn't even subtle. Growing up, he got the new bikes, the weekend trips, the expensive tutoring. I got hand-me-downs, leftover affection, and the "you're so independent" pep talks whenever I tried to ask for anything similar. My parents split when I was 10. Mom got custody. Dad moved out and across town, not far, but emotionally it felt like he'd gone to Mars. He always tried to stay involved, but the guilt made him more of a background character than a co-parent. He showed up for birthdays, occasionally helped with school projects, and later, when I hit my 20s, we reconnected over coffee and taxes and life advice. Quietly, always quietly. Daniel, meanwhile, played the part of the perfect son so well it might as well have been written for him. Ivy League business school, paid for, of course. A lavish wedding 3 years ago where I wasn't even asked to be the best man. A job Dad got him through an old friend, and when that didn't pan out, Mom bailed him out with a condo she happened to be holding on to. Nobody ever called it favoritism. They called it support. They called me self-sufficient. They said I didn't need as much help. I never really argued with it out loud. On paper, they weren't entirely wrong. I'd put myself through school on scholarships and late-night delivery shifts. I started a small graphic design company in my 20s and, after years of grinding and sleepless nights, turned it into a full-scale branding agency with actual employees and contracts. I own a modest but clean place, drive a 10-year-old car, and haven't asked them for a dime since I was 18. But success doesn't erase the sting of being overlooked. If anything, it just makes it easier for people to justify ignoring you. So when Mom sat us down that night and said, "Now that your father and I are getting older, we've decided it's time to make things clear about the future," I already had a bad feeling in my stomach. She had her lawyer's folder in one hand, her reading glasses in the other. I looked over at Dad, who was unusually quiet, his jaw clenched like he was trying not to say something. Daniel leaned back, confident, one arm draped over the back of his chair like he owned the place. Which, apparently, he soon would. Mom went on, explaining how they'd been restructuring the estate, how they wanted to avoid confusion later, and how they thought it was best to be transparent with us. "We've decided Daniel will inherit the house, the lake property, and the family trust," she said, like she was announcing tomorrow's weather. "Craig, you've done very well for yourself. You're thriving. You're independent. We don't worry about you. So this just makes the most sense." I didn't even blink. I just nodded. Not because I agreed, but because I'd gotten used to this. The rationalizations. The passive compliments that were really just excuses not to treat me equally. I stared at the cake, watching the frosting melt into the plate under the heat of the chandelier. No one said anything for a second. Daniel smiled, trying to look humble but failing. Mom looked at me like she expected a reaction. Dad kept staring at the table, and for a moment, I thought I saw shame flash across his face. The thing is, a few weeks before that meeting, I had shown Dad something. Something big. Something that would have changed everything if anyone else had seen it. But I'd asked him to keep it between us, at least for the time being. And he had. Until that moment. Later that night, after everyone had gone their separate ways, Daniel back to his condo, Mom to her garden tea on the porch, Dad found me in the hallway near the coat closet. His voice was low. His eyes were heavy. "Please," he whispered, "tell them what you showed me. I think it's time." I hesitated. I could feel the weight of everything pressing in on me. Years of being second. Years of swallowing things just to keep the peace. But when I walked back into that dining room and pulled out the folder from my bag, the same one I had once shyly handed to Dad over coffee, the room fell quiet. My brother's smile vanished first. Mom's face went pale next. Dad stood beside me, not saying a word, but his presence said enough. I flipped open the folder and laid the documents out on the table. No one moved at first. The only sound in the room was the faint hum of the fridge and the whisper of the pages as I spread them slowly across the table like playing cards in a high-stakes poker game. I could feel their eyes on me, flickering between confusion and growing tension, like they weren't sure if I was bluffing or holding something nuclear. Daniel was the first to break the silence. "What is this?" he asked, his voice dipping into that smug tone he always used when he thought he was still in control. Like he already believed he'd won, and this was just a formality. A little show for attention. He was half laughing, eyes scanning the first sheet. "Craig, come on. We don't need to drag. Shut up and read," Dad cut in. It wasn't loud. It wasn't angry. But it was the kind of voice that stopped people mid-breath. Even I looked at him. I hadn't heard Dad speak like that since I was a teenager, and he caught Daniel trying to frame me for breaking the garage window. Mom adjusted her glasses, leaned in, and finally picked up the first document, a signed valuation report, then a partnership contract, then a notarized letter from a corporate lawyer. I didn't say anything. I just let them read. 3 weeks earlier, I'd finalized something big, something that had been quietly years in the making. I'd negotiated a merger between my branding agency and one of the fastest-growing digital marketing firms on the East Coast. The deal not only gave me a significant equity stake, but the resulting company had been valued at just over $25 million. Dad was the only one I'd told. I didn't want to parade it around like some sort of flex. That's never been me. But I showed him the paperwork because I wanted him to understand that I wasn't just doing fine. I had built something real, something I never once asked them to help me with. And now, faced with these papers, with the truth spelled out in clean fonts and legal signatures, Mom went still. Her fingers stopped mid-page. Daniel's smirk was gone entirely. "What is this supposed to mean?" he finally asked. But this time his voice cracked. Just slightly. The kind of crack that happens when you realize, too late, that the ground you were standing on wasn't solid. "I showed this to Dad weeks ago," I said, my voice steady. He knew, and I asked him not to say anything until I was ready. I didn't want to throw it in anyone's face. "Then why now?" Mom snapped. Her voice was sharper than I expected. Not hurt, not even embarrassed. Defensive. "Why humiliate us like this in our own home?" I blinked. "Humiliate? You just sat me down and told me my brother gets everything because I'm doing fine. You tried to justify cutting me out of the family trust like it was common sense. You've done it all my life. And now that I show you something concrete, I'm the one being unfair." Daniel stood up, looking more rattled now. "You think money makes you better than us?" "No," I said, "but it apparently made you better than me for the last 20 years. And I never said a word. That was when things truly started to unravel. The days that followed were tense. We didn't speak much after that night. Not even when we bumped into each other during a family barbecue. Mom insisted on keeping on the calendar for appearances. The quiet was worse than yelling. It was cold, measured, like they were regrouping, strategizing. I thought that would be the end of it, the awkward reveal, the emotional gut punch, the dramatic scene. I assumed, wrongly, that now that the truth was out, we'd settle into a new normal. Not close, not friendly, but honest. I underestimated them. A week later, I got a call from my bank. A flagged attempt to access one of my business accounts. Then another call, this time from a leasing office I'd worked with on a branding campaign. They were suddenly rescinding our contract, citing reputational concerns linked to rumors about my company's funding. And then the worst one, an anonymous tip to the IRS suggesting I'd falsified portions of my merger valuation. My hands went numb as I sat there in my apartment, piecing it together. I didn't have proof yet, but I had a pretty solid hunch where this was coming from. Daniel knew people in finance. He'd worked at 2 firms, both of which had ties to the local startup scene. And Mom had spent her life building connections through the country club and PDA networks that could reach into any number of businesses or organizations. They hadn't just dismissed me. They were trying to break me. I met Dad for coffee the next morning. We sat in the corner booth of a diner we used to go to when I was in high school. He didn't even touch his cup, just looked at me like he already knew what I was going to say. "I need to ask," I said. "Did you tell them anything I told you in confidence?" He shook his head, quick and firm. "No. I swear to you, Craig. Not a word." I nodded slowly. "Then it's them. They're retaliating." He exhaled hard. "I thought this might happen. That's why I made copies." I looked up. "Copies?" He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small leather folder. not unlike the one I'd used at the dinner. Inside were duplicates of everything I'd shown him, and more. Screenshots of messages Daniel had sent him over the years, filled with arrogant boasts and casual contempt. Notes Mom had written, including one particularly rough one that said, in her handwriting, "Don't give Craig too much. He'll just waste it trying to prove himself." I didn't say anything. I couldn't. My mouth had gone dry. That wasn't even the worst of it. Because 2 days after that, I got a knock at my office door. My assistant let me know someone had stopped by, a woman, early 30s, wearing a beige coat and holding a baby on her hip. She asked for me by name, said it was important. I walked out front and froze the second I saw her face. "Hi," she said quietly. "You don't know me, but I know your brother." I blinked. "I'm sorry, what?" Her eyes flicked down. "My name is Lindsay. Daniel and I dated for almost 3 years. We had a son together. He told me he'd handle everything, that your family would help. But then he ghosted us. Said he couldn't be seen with me. Said it would complicate his legacy." I stared at her. She opened her bag and pulled out documents, paternity results, texts, even a letter from a lawyer Daniel had paid to offer her hush money in exchange for signing a waiver of child support. I took it all. I didn't even know what I was going to do with it yet, but I took it. When she left, I sat back in my chair, surrounded by the weight of everything. My chest tight, my brain reeling, my hands shaking. This wasn't just favoritism. This was character assassination. This was sabotage. This was my own family trying to bury me because I didn't stay in the box they built for me. Because I didn't stay quiet. Because I didn't let them hand Daniel a crown he didn't deserve without a fight. And that was the moment it happened. The breaking point. The quiet, suffocating realization that I could never go back to who I was before that dinner. That this wasn't just about inheritance or business or even resentment. This was war, and I was done playing nice. The first Real hit came 3 days after Lindsay showed up at my office. It was a Thursday morning, gray and spitting rain. I was sitting at my desk, half focused on drafting an email to a potential client in Atlanta, when my phone buzzed. Caller ID, my firm's lead counsel, Nina. No greeting, no preamble, just 6 words I'll never forget. "Craig, we have a serious problem." I leaned back in my chair, heart already racing. "Go on." "There's been a leak," she said. "Multiple documents tied to the merger, projections, early-stage term sheets, even some internal communications between your team and theirs. Someone forwarded them anonymously to the investor's legal counsel. They're now questioning if you inflated numbers to close the deal." My stomach dropped. I didn't. We were conservative with the projections. "You know that." "I know," she said. "But the optics don't look good. Especially not with the new anonymous tip to the SEC." I didn't even hear the rest. My brain shut off after SEC. By that afternoon, 2 major clients had paused contracts, pending clarification. One PR firm we were courting quietly backed out of a branding project. The new merged board scheduled an emergency session without inviting me, despite my equity stake. In my inbox? A landmine of damage control. I went home that night, kicked off my shoes, and just stood in the kitchen staring at the blank wall above the stove. It felt like my whole body had become static, that numb, white noise feeling when you're too exhausted to be angry but not tired enough to sleep. I didn't tell anyone, not even Dad. Not at first. I didn't want to give my family the satisfaction of knowing their scheme had worked. But it was working. Every day for the next week, it was something else. A whisper campaign about how I manipulated the merger. An anonymous blog post claiming I'd bullied an intern 2 years ago. Complete fabrication, but damaging enough to make a few people side-eye me. A subtle, slow drip erosion of my name, like rust on metal you can't scrub off. And the worst part? It worked. At least temporarily. 2 weeks later, the board voted to suspend my executive duties, pending further investigation. My lawyer warned me not to make public statements. Nina was doing damage control, but even she looked tired on our Zoom calls. My company, the one I built from scratch in a tiny apartment on a secondhand laptop, was slipping through my fingers. I hit rock bottom on a Wednesday. I remember it exactly. I hadn't eaten more than half a granola bar in 24 hours. I hadn't answered any personal messages, not even from Dad. I was sitting on the edge of my bathtub, still in yesterday's hoodie, watching the sink drip like it was trying to keep time. That's when my phone buzzed again. One new email. Subject, thought you'd like to see this. No sender name, just an address I didn't recognize. I opened it. Attached was a screenshot of a text exchange between Daniel and someone labeled Ruthie, Mom's friend. He was gloating, saying things like, he thought he could just strut in and embarrass us. Now he's learning what real power looks like. And another message, wait until the IRS letter hits. He'll fold. I stared at the screen, a wave of nausea crawling up my throat. But underneath the sickness, there was something else. A spark, a flicker of clarity. They weren't trying to win. They were trying to erase me. That was the night everything changed. I didn't sleep. Instead, I sat down and wrote out everything I knew. Every name, every connection, every underhanded trick I suspected. I started pulling receipts, emails, calendar logs, audio memos. I combed through years of files. By dawn, I had a rough timeline, a pattern, and a motive. I made 3 calls that day. First to Dad, who picked up before the second ring. I'm in, I said. I'm not taking this lying down. Second to Lindsay, Daniel's ex, who'd left her number in case I ever needed help. She answered from what sounded like a daycare drop-off line. I told her I believed her. I told her I wanted to help her get justice, too. She didn't hesitate. Third to someone I hadn't talked to in years, Malcolm Nguyen. A data security expert I'd done a small contract for back when I was freelancing. Quiet guy. Sharp. A ghost online, but a wizard with digital forensics. You need a paper trail traced? He asked after I explained. I can do better. Give me access, and I'll show you where the fingerprints are. The next 2 months were slow, methodical, and grueling. While the official investigation into me plodded along, I worked behind the scenes. Quietly, carefully, I cleared my calendar, fired my assistant to avoid leaks, operated from my home office with the blinds shut and the lights low. Malcolm found 3 document modifications on the leaked files, timestamps altered to make them look more recent. One matched the IP address of Daniel's condo complex. Another came from an account tied to Mom's nonprofit. Dad, meanwhile, went digging through the family's financial history, not for my sake, but for his own. After all, the trust had originally been set up jointly, and he wanted to understand how Mom had gotten the lawyer to exclude me without even a discussion. What he found was damning. Somehow, over the years, Mom had been moving small amounts, $5,000 here, $10,000 there, from various family investments into a private account. One that had quietly funded Daniel's condo, his failed business venture, and even part of his wedding. She had siphoned nearly $400,000 without telling Dad. He didn't confront her right away. He documented everything, had a third-party accountant verify the transfers, quietly removed his name from all joint accounts. Then he came to me and said, when the time comes, I'll back you. Fully. But while I was rebuilding from the shadows, life didn't pause. I started therapy again, virtual sessions twice a week. Not because I needed to heal, but because I needed someone to help me make sense of the mess. Someone neutral. Someone who didn't try to convince me to be the bigger person or forgive and forget. And in those sessions, I realized something. I'd spent most of my life trying to earn their love, their approval, their attention. I'd worked myself to the bone not just to succeed, but to prove I was worth something to them. But they were never going to see me. Not really. And I didn't need them to. The realization didn't fix everything. It didn't erase the betrayal or the anger, but it gave me clarity, freedom. And with that freedom came energy, the kind I hadn't felt in years. I started working out again, not to look good, just to feel strong. I reconnected with a few friends I'd pushed away during the chaos of scaling my business. I even booked a solo trip to Montana for a week, just to get air, space, a view of something that wasn't skyscrapers or spreadsheets. And then something unexpected happened. An investor I'd once pitched to, a venture capitalist named Teresa who'd passed on my merger offer but liked my ethics, reached out. Said she'd heard, through the grapevine, that I was having a rough time. Asked if I wanted to grab lunch. We did. 1 lunch turned into 2. Then 3. Eventually, she asked, "What are you working on now?" I smiled and said, "A comeback." She leaned in. "Tell me more." By the time I left that 3rd lunch, we had a handshake agreement. She'd back me if I wanted to start something new, something independent. She believed in me, not just because of what I'd built before, but because of how I'd handled its collapse. "You took a hit," she said, "and you didn't crumble. Most people would have. That's the kind of founder I bet on." So I began drafting again. Not out of spite, not for revenge, for me. By the end of the 3rd month, the dust around the merger had started to settle. The board investigation concluded that while there had been concerns raised, no material fraud or ethical breach could be confirmed. I wasn't reinstated. The damage to my image had already served their purposes, but I kept my equity, which meant two things. I still had influence, and I was still in the room. Not that Mom or Daniel knew that. As far as they were concerned, I was a ghost, swept aside, buried by their maneuvering, too proud or broken to push back. And I let them think that. I fed into it. I posted less online. I skipped a few family events. I even sent a polite, detached message to Mom thanking her for the clarity she gave me that night at the dinner table. It was pure theater, and she swallowed it whole. I needed them comfortable. I needed them overconfident. Because I wasn't just planning to hit back. I was planning to make sure they never forgot the sound of it. And I knew exactly where to start. The house. Our family home wasn't just sentimental real estate. It sat on over 2 acres of land in a rapidly gentrifying suburb. When I did the math with Dad's accountant, I realized something staggering. The property alone was worth nearly $2.8 million. More if subdivided. Mom had always spoken of it like it was a crown jewel, passed from one worthy heir to the next. Which, of course, in her mind meant Daniel. But there was a problem with that. It wasn't entirely hers to give. Back when they bought it, my parents had signed a rare joint deed agreement with a survivorship clause. The clause stated that neither party could sell, gift, or bequeath the property to a third party without mutual consent, even post-divorce, unless one of them died. That clause had sat dormant for years, collecting metaphorical dust. Until now. And Mom, she'd forgotten all about it. I didn't remind her. I reminded Dad. You still own half. I told him, sliding the scanned clause across the table during a late-night visit to his condo. And she never voided this when she split. If she tries to transfer the title to Daniel without your signature, it triggers a freeze. Dad looked at it like I'd just handed him a loaded revolver. I never wanted it to come to this, he said. I know, I replied. But she made it come to you. He sat back, rubbing his temples. You really think they'd go through with it? That she'd try to sneak it through? I think she already did, I said, opening my laptop. Malcolm had been digging for weeks. With my permission, he'd tracked metadata from property registry API logs. And he found something. A series of draft title transfer documents uploaded and edited from Mom's personal laptop IP address. All dated before that dinner meeting. One even listed Daniel as the sole heir presumptive. She hadn't just made a plan. She'd already acted on it. Dad stared at the screen for a long time. Then he closed it. What do you need from me? Nothing yet, I said. But when I give the signal, I want you to stop the transfer. Cold. Publicly. He nodded. Done. Next, I reached out to Lindsay. Since our first meeting, we'd kept in touch. Not just because we had a common enemy, but because she was sharp. Strategic. After years of being ghosted and sidelined by Daniel, she'd quietly documented everything. Phone calls, bank statements, even a voice memo of him admitting he was too high profile now to deal with custody drama. I want to help you, I told her. But more than that, I want to protect your son. You both deserve more than scraps. I don't want his money, she said. I just want him legally tied. On paper. No more hiding. Then let's do it. Together, we reached out to a family law attorney who specialized in high-conflict cases. I covered the fees, anonymously, through a holding company I'd set up months ago. We filed a paternity claim and, within weeks, received court-ordered DNA results. Daniel didn't even fight it. Probably thought it wouldn't go public. He had no idea what I was preparing. Then came the wild card, Aunt Nadine. She was Mom's younger sister, estranged from the family for over a decade after a bitter inheritance dispute involving their father's fishing cabin. Back then, Mom had convinced everyone Nadine was being greedy. But when I tracked her down through an old contact at a genealogy service, long story, I got the truth. She gutted me, Nadine said on the phone. Lied about our dad's will. Told the lawyer I forged documents. I lost everything. And if you had a chance to speak up again? I asked. I'd shout. Perfect. I invited her to a small charity gala my company was sponsoring. Technically still under the merged firm's name, but I was hosting under my new brand. It wasn't a flashy event, just highbrow enough to attract attention from our local business circles. And yes, I invited my mother, and Daniel, and several of her old bridge club friends who'd bought into the narrative that I was unstable and overreacting. It was bait, and they bit hard. I still remember the look on Mom's face when she walked in and saw me at the entrance, standing beside Aunt Nadine in a sleek navy dress, glass of wine in hand, laughing softly like we were old friends. Her smile faltered. She tried to recover, but her eyes flicked between us like a deer caught in crossfire. Daniel arrived 15 minutes later, oblivious as ever. He walked up, gave me a stiff nod, and started his usual routine, bragging about some startup conference he was invited to, fishing for compliments he thought he'd earned. And then the real show began. One by one, I introduced Aunt Nadine to every person Mom had poisoned against her. I let her tell her side of the story. I nodded thoughtfully, corroborated details where needed, and watched the room slowly shift, the doubt creeping into the eyes of women who'd once echoed every word my mother said like gospel. Later, Daniel pulled me aside near the open bar. "What are you doing?" he hissed. "Hosting a party," I said innocently. "What does it look like?" "You're trying to make her look bad." "I'm just giving people the truth. If it looks bad, that's not my fault." His nostrils flared. "You're pathetic. And you're a confirmed father who doesn't pay child support," I said, pulling out my phone and showing him the court filing, with his name stamped across the top. He went pale. "You wouldn't." "Oh, I won't have to," I said. "You'll do it yourself." I walked away before he could reply. The final phase of my setup came 2 weeks later, the family meeting. Mom scheduled it. Same house, same dining room, same cake, like it was some twisted tradition now. She called it an update meeting. I called it the stage. Daniel looked tired. Not just stressed, haunted. He knew something was coming, but not what. Mom was still trying to keep the upper hand. She smiled as everyone sat, papers neatly stacked beside her. "I just want to make sure we're all clear on where things stand," she began. "Given everything that's happened, I think we need to move forward with full transparency." "That's funny," Dad said, sipping his tea without looking at her. "Transparency was never really your thing." She bristled. "I beg your pardon." He didn't answer, just set down the cup and looked at me. "You ready?" I pulled the folder from my bag, a different folder this time. Thicker, heavier. And this time, I wasn't the only one holding one. Lindsay stepped into the room from the hallway, escorted by her attorney. Aunt Nadine arrived 5 minutes later, and Malcolm, in a rare public appearance, walked in holding a tablet loaded with a PowerPoint and timestamps. Mom stood up. "What is this? What's going on?" I looked at her, at Daniel, at the house I grew up in, the very room where she tried to write me out of everything. "This," I said, "is the truth." And then I opened the folder. For a moment, all you could hear in the room was the faint ticking of the grandfather clock behind Dad's chair. My mother's mouth hung open slightly, not in shock, but in the sort of stunned disbelief that people get when they realize they've lost control and the rules have changed mid-game. Daniel was staring at Lindsay like she was a ghost from a dream he swore he'd buried. And Dad, he just leaned back in his chair, folded his arms, and waited. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. "This folder," I said, sliding it slowly toward the center of the table, "contains a timeline of every attempt made to sabotage my career. Dates, times, IP addresses, password resets from Daniel's network, a false IRS tip that can be traced to a device in this house, correspondence between Mom and her bridge club, which reads more like a coordinated smear campaign than casual gossip." I paused and looked directly at Daniel. "There are screenshots, Dan. Metadata. Malcolm here." I gestured to my friend by the door, verified it all. "Your digital fingerprints are all over it. Yours and Mom's." Mom scoffed. "Craig, this is ridiculous. You're trying to humiliate us with wild accusations because you couldn't handle a simple estate decision. Right?" I said, my voice calm. "Let's talk about that decision." Dad reached into his folder and pulled out a crisp, notarized document. The original survivorship deed from when he and Mom bought the house in 1989. "You tried to transfer the property to Daniel without my knowledge," he said, turning to her. "That's illegal. I've already filed a motion to freeze the title." Mom paled. "You wouldn't." "I already did," he cut her off. "The house is locked in probate now. Nothing can be done with it until both parties agree. And I don't agree." Daniel, looking between us like a cornered animal, blurted out, "This is insane. You're all trying to gang up on us. You're ruining this family." "No," Lindsay said sharply, stepping forward with her attorney. "You did that when you abandoned your son." She set a small photo on the table. A toddler with Daniel's unmistakable eyes, smiling up from a pumpkin patch. Court-ordered paternity confirmed you're the father. You signed a letter offering hush money to avoid legal responsibility. You manipulated me, lied to my face, and when I refused to disappear, you cut off communication. Well, not anymore. We filed for full custody review and child support retroactive to the date of birth. Daniel went rigid. You can't do that. Lindsay's lawyer calmly slid a stack of papers across the table. We already did. Mom stood, trying to take control. All right, enough. Craig, if this is your idea of revenge, you've made your point. What more do you want? An apology? I turned to her. No. I want you to watch as everything you built on lies and favoritism crumbles. I want you to sit in the house you tried to steal from me and realize it's no longer yours to give. I want Daniel to pay for his son, not just financially, but by being forced to be the father he's never had the guts to be. She laughed, bitter, defensive. You think you've won something? You're still alone. Just a bitter little man obsessed with getting even. No, I said, standing now, my voice steady. I'm not alone. And I wasn't. Because over the past 4 months, I'd built something stronger than revenge. I'd built a network. People who'd been wronged. People they stepped on. Employees Daniel had mistreated. Tenants Mom had manipulated through her nonprofit's rental holdings. Friends of mine they dismissed, badmouthed, underestimated. They came forward, quietly at first, then louder. I launched a foundation 3 days later. The Glassroots Initiative, named after the idea that people who live in glass houses shouldn't throw stones. Funded by my own holdings and matched by investors like Teresa, who happily contributed after hearing how I was framed. It was a startup incubator for young entrepreneurs with no family support. People like me, back then. We offered mentorship, seed funding, brand development, and a team of legal advisors who specialized in shielding founders from predatory investors, like Daniel used to be. When the launch made local business news, the article included a single line that sent shockwaves through my family. Founded by Craig Hemsworth, former co-founder of Maven Brand and current majority stakeholder in Emergent Creative Holdings. Because what Mom and Daniel hadn't known was that I never lost control of my company. While I'd been ousted as CEO, I had negotiated my equity stake into a new holding firm. I never left. I simply stepped sideways. And when Teresa and a few other sympathetic board members learned the full truth of the smear campaign, they forced a shareholder vote to reinstate me, not as CEO, but as chairman. Daniel lost every remaining contact he had in our industry within days. And Mom, the fallout was more personal. Dad filed a financial misappropriation claim on the family trust. With evidence from the accountant he'd quietly hired, he froze the remaining assets pending audit. Over $900,000 that Mom had discreetly moved into gifts and unregistered distributions to Daniel over the past 5 years. She claimed it was helping a struggling child. The audit board called it fraudulent misallocation of generational wealth. She lost control of the trust. Her name was removed from its oversight. Dad restructured the payouts into equal 50-50 shares, one to me, one to a custodial account for Daniel's son, to be administered by Lindsay until he turned 18. Mom moved out of the family house 6 weeks later, citing emotional stress. She now lives in a small rental across town. Daniel tried to crash with her, but eventually gave up and moved into a friend's basement. I never celebrated. No champagne. No post gloating online. No, I told you so family text. I just got back to work. Because that's who I've always been. Quiet, steady, relentless. Dad and I are closer than ever. We talk every weekend. He's even started mentoring some of the kids in my foundation. Sometimes I catch him smiling at nothing, like a man who finally, after all these years, said what needed to be said. As for Lindsay, we're not dating, in case you're wondering. But we've become friends. Real ones. Her son's birthday is next month, and she asked if I'd come. I said yes. I bought him a telescope. And every now and then, I pass by the old family house. The lawn trimmed, the porch light still flickering like always. It's empty now. No one wants it. Not anymore. And I smile. Because sometimes, the best revenge isn't destroying what they have. It's becoming everything they told you you'd never be. And making sure they have no part in it.